Well, everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Guess what, guys? I got the man himself, Rich Roll. For those people that actually don't know who he is, Rich is a graduate of Stanford University and Cornell Law School. Rich is also a 50-year-old accomplished vegan ultra-endurance athlete and former entertainment attorney turned full-time wellness and plant-based nutrition advocate. He's a popular public speaker, husband, father of four, and inspiration to people worldwide as a transformative example of courageous and healthy living. He is also the host of the ever popular podcast, the Rich Roll podcast, which always persistently sits at the top of the iTunes top 10 list. And in 2014, Rich and his wife wrote a best-selling book or cookbook and lifestyle planner, the Plantpower Way, whole food, plant-based recipes and guidance for the whole family. He's also got a new book out called Voicing Change, which I highly encourage you guys to check out as well. Rich, welcome so much to the Storybox podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's I have to say, I've never really been nervous in any conversation that I've done, and I'm nervous. If I can be that real with you, man. It's always good having other podcasters on here that ask great questions. So before we dive into your backstory, how you got started doing all these amazing things, I have one particular question I love asking all my guests at the very start, which is, what does success look like for you?
That's a great question. I would say for me, the answer to that question is always kind of morphing and evolving. Right now, the way I think about success has very little to do with likes or remuneration. It's really about having domain and control over your time. You know, I'm very lucky that I'm in a situation now where I get to wake up every day and do something that I love doing. And my business is very related to following my curiosity, which is something I don't take for granted, and is something that has not always been the case for me. I've worked in jobs and had careers where that was not the case. So it's always good to remind myself of that. So for me, success is really about the freedom to follow the things that interest you. And I think in hand with that is finding a way to do that in service to other people, like taking these things that you find meaningful, having the liberty and the freedom to explore those things and then share them liberally to the positive benefit of others.
When was the moment for you that you realized this was success for you? Has it been like this gradual thing over time, or was there a catalyst moment somewhere in your life?
There's been lots of catalyst moments, big and small, along the way. But in terms of kind of coming to terms with success, I mean, that's been a very gradual thing and a very slow thing. And I think a thing that people don't properly appreciate in terms of like the timeline. It sort of looks like, oh, this guy is like writing these books and he's doing this podcast and it must be easy for him. But, I've been podcasting for almost 9 years at this point. I did it for several years, many years, before, it paid me a penny. I was doing it because I loved doing it and because it excited me and it sort of satisfied a creative itch. But I would say that when I had the opportunity I guess it was around 2010 when I got my first book deal and had an opportunity to write a book, I realized that was the beginning of being able to recreate my life more in alignment with the things that I cared about. And that was just a very initial step. And it took many, many years before I was in a situation where I was running a business that was stable and providing for my family. And in the in-between years, there were a lot of really lean years and a lot of very difficult, financial situations that I found myself in that really tested my faith and and many moments where I thought about just hanging it up and try to find a job back at a law firm. My former career was as a lawyer, and I'm very grateful and glad that I stuck it out, and it's all fine now. But it was certainly not an overnight thing.
I'm kind of at that point at the moment where I'm kind of on the tipping point. Like, should I actually continue doing it? Because starting out, I've only been doing this about a year and 3 months. So it's not a great deal of time. And I've seen all the growth, I've seen everything, but I still get a ton of rejection. And what I'm curious about is for you, Rich, you went from a lawyer to now a successful podcast host, author, and you're transforming the lives of so many people. Did you ever see yourself doing any of this, like being an author, being the host that you are, asking the kind of questions that you do? Did you ever see yourself doing that?
No. I mean, I would say that I always enjoyed writing, and I knew that I had a knack for it. And writing was something that I did in college, and always excelled at it. And then as a lawyer, that's a different kind of writing, but it's something that you do every single day as a lawyer. You're trying to figure out how to articulate a point of view and lobby on behalf of a client and do that with words. So I've always, no matter what career I've been in, writing has always been involved. But I will tell you that when I had the opportunity to write my first book, I couldn't believe that somebody was giving me permission to do that. Like, it was very surreal. And at that time, I guess podcasting probably existed, but the idea that I would be a podcaster, let alone be successful at it, no, that never entered my mind. But it's kind of like anything. When enough time passes and you look in the rearview mirror, it all makes sense. And it's like, of course, this is where you ended up. And I can identify experiences that I've had along the way that have all been very instrumental and informative in sort of crafting this person that I am today. And specifically to podcasting, I've spent thousands of hours sitting in AA meetings, like listening to people tell their stories and demonstrating unbelievable courage and vulnerability. And then in turn, learning how to share my story from the podium in that context. And so that's where I think I really went to school in terms of trying to figure out what that story is, and also learning the power of bringing voice to the authentic self within, and really learning to fall in love and respect the people that could muster that courage to do that. And in part, like, an aspect of my podcast is trying to provide people who are not, in a 12-step program or trying to recover from addiction, some taste or sense of what that experience is like, because I find it to be so powerful. And then as a lawyer, I took tons and tons of depositions where you sit across from somebody for hours and hours and hours and ask them questions and try to elicit, the information that you need. So, that was kind of like my training ground for what I get to do today.
And we're all grateful that you left being a lawyer to become a podcast host and having the kind of conversations that you do have. I want to go back a little bit to sort of get some context around your story for a moment. So you were a lawyer. What ended up happening that changed for you to go into doing the career path that you're doing now?
Sure. So my whole life, I was sort of on a certain kind of traditional track. I grew up in a household where education was very important, and I took that seriously. And did my best to try to live up to familial and social expectations of what somebody of my upbringing is meant to do, right? Like, get into the best college, get the good grades, try to get the good summer internships, then try to get into the best grad school. And in my case, that was law school. Then you get a job at a law firm and you try to become partner. And never once along that path did I really spend a lot of time in self-reflection about whether this was even the right path for me. It's like, putting the ladder up against the wall and climbing it before you consider whether that's really the right wall you should be climbing up. And if I have any kind of special skill, it's that I know how to suffer. So even when I'm in an uncomfortable situation or one that is perhaps at odds with what I'm meant to be doing, I can still gut it out and do it. And that's what I did as a lawyer. Like, I never had any true love of the law. I just felt like this is a good career path. And so I did it for many, many years. And kind of, even though I got sober at 31, spent the next many years still practicing law with a growing understanding that I knew that I was in the wrong career path, but feeling trapped and unsure about how to really switch gears. And it wasn't until I had, a bit of an existential crisis that collided with a health scare shortly before I turned 40, when I really began to, for the very first time, take like honest stock of what I was doing and try to figure out an alternative path. And that was confusing. There's kind of a yarn or a narrative that gets spun on the internet in this kind of startup entrepreneur culture, like just quit your job and follow your passion. And, I always caution people against that. Not everybody's ready to do that, nor is everybody suited for that kind of adventure. And in my case, I had always been a safety seeker. I wasn't, bred to be an entrepreneur or a risk taker, essentially a pretty risk averse person. So the idea of doing something harsh, or drastic, like tossing that 3 years of law school out the window and all the years that I'd spent, learning my craft as a lawyer out the window, just seemed insane to me. But the more I practiced law, the more I realized like I just need to be doing something else. But I didn't really have the skill set for anything else. So the way I began to wrestle with this kind of crisis was through endurance sports. Like when I had that kind of epiphany moment, I changed my relationship with food and diet. I had kind of a resurgence of vitality and really got interested in getting outdoors and getting fit again. I'd been a swimmer in college, and it was something that I kind of put in the rear view and hadn't explored in many years. And the more I did that, though, at this period of time, the more I was enjoying it. And it was really that kind of solitary alone time, whether it was out trail running or on my bike, that I was able to kind of marinate in, this dilemma that I found myself in and wrestle with those questions. And that led ultimately to, some clarity about needing to walk away from that and do something else. But, I married and had kids and a mortgage and car payments and all that kind of stuff at the time. So just, a bold gesture wasn't going to work. But in my case, I got this book deal. I was still practicing law. I was training for ultra. I was trying to write Finding Ultra while I was practicing law, and also training like 20 hours a week for these races and be a present parent and partner. And that was a hat trick. It was very difficult to do that, but I knew that was going to be a portal to something new. I didn't know that it would take, another like 8 years after that before everything kind of solidified to create some stability. But it's always been for me just doing the next thing and then being prepared for whatever opportunity would then present itself. So it was really like one step at a time. Like I wrote the book, like, hey, so-and-so wants you to go. They read your book. They want you to come and speak here. So I do that. And I just trusted that every step would continue to direct me in the right direction, and that ultimately it would pay off. I thought it would pay off a lot sooner than it did. I think I just needed to burn in the fire a little bit more so that I could, carry a vibration that was just a little bit more powerful. And that's how I kind of look at it today.
There's a lot for me to unpack with that story. And the first thing that I want to sort of go down is you mentioned you got sober. So I'm assuming that you had a problem with alcohol. Where did that come from? Was it because of the long hours in law, or was there some pre-composed drinking problem already?
Yeah, no, the drinking started before that. I was not in high school. I was a good kid. I studied hard, and it was all about swimming. Like I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning and going to swim practice before school, and then swim practice after school, and studying, going to bed. So I never got in trouble in high school. But when I was a senior in high school, I started going on these recruiting trips to colleges because I was getting, there was interest in me being a collegiate swimmer. And it was on those trips where I got introduced to some pretty fun parties. And that was, that was a new experience for me. But my relationship with alcohol from the get-go has always been different from that of a normal person. And it's something that I was always aware of. Like I'm one of those people, and I'm sure you've heard this with other recovering alcoholics. Like the first time that I got loaded, I just thought this is the solution to all my problems. Like this is how I'm supposed to feel. Everything suddenly made sense. It was like I was wrapping my body in a warm blanket, and the roadmap for life, suddenly became clear. And I just wanted to feel that way all the time. And when you're young, when you're in college, some of this behavior is just normal. Like you can kind of get away with it because everyone's drinking and partying. But I was the guy who was the last one to leave the party, or trying to look for the empties after the keg was tapped out, and the one who had the more embarrassing stories the next day. And that's kind of fun and innocent at first, but as you progress through your 20s and suddenly you're 30, it's not so cute anymore. And in my case, the repercussions of my drinking just continued to kind of slowly escalate over time, to the point where at the end, there was nothing really funny or cool about it at all. It was just sad and pathetic and incredibly lonely, to the point where I was sleeping on a bare mattress in an otherwise unfurnished apartment on the precipice of losing my job. I was drinking round the clock. My family didn't want anything to do with me anymore. I lost a bunch of friendships. I was completely unreliable. I was incapable of being in a relationship or telling the truth or showing up when I said I was going to show up. And my life was just a house of cards that was crashing down on top of me, culminating in a failed marriage and, 2 DUIs in 2 months, and getting my license revoked and looking at jail time, until, I just reached that moment of clarity that you also hear about with recovering alcoholics, where I just realized I just couldn't live this way anymore. And I'd been trying to get sober in my own way, but I hadn't really wrestled with the profundity of this problem that I was contending with. And, I met my maker with it until I was, completely broken and had nowhere else to turn, and ultimately ended up in a treatment center in rural Oregon in 1998. I was 31, and I ended up living there for 100 days. And that experience saved my life. It gave me the tools to reconfigure my life in accordance with spiritual principles. And ever since that experience, sobriety has been my number one priority. And so much of what I talk about on the podcast, and so many of the tools that have been instrumental in transforming my life to this day are still the most important, tools that I turn to not just keep myself from drinking, because it's not often that I have that kind of craving, but to maintain my emotional sobriety, so that I carry the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous into all of my affairs, as they say.
Are you ever worried that you might get addicted to alcohol again at some point?
Well, I'm currently addicted to alcohol. I will always be addicted to alcohol. So I have not recovered from alcoholism. I am in recovery. Yeah. I am always recovering. And, I did have after 13 years of sobriety, I had a little brief relapse, and luckily found my way right back to the program immediately. But it scared me, and it reminded me and made me realize just how powerful and cunning and baffling alcohol is, because I picked up And I was right back where I was, in 1998, like no time had passed. And that was very frightening and a reminder that, this is a demon that, is kind of always there. And I need to be rigorous about my sobriety in order to, keep that devil at bay. As they say, it's always doing push-ups in the background. So that's something I'm very mindful about. But I'm also, in the context of emotional sobriety, mindful as to how my alcoholic tendencies can find their way into other things that I do, whether it's workaholism or even my relationship with addiction sports. I mean, endurance sports. Like, you can have an addictive relationship with anything, really. So I'm always trying to calibrate that, while also being gentle on myself. Like, there are aspects of that addictive tendency that I have that can work to my benefit. And I'm cool with that, but I just have to make sure that all the other buckets in my life are being properly attended to, so that I'm walking the spiritual path that I want to be walking.
How does your spiritual practice help you with, I guess, achieving this recovery process of addiction, and how is that, and more specifically, what is your spiritual practice?
Yeah, well, it's rooted in 12 steps, which has a lot to do with being accountable for your actions, taking responsibility for your actions, being rigorous in the inventory of your behavior and always identifying where you've gone awry, being quick to make amends for your transgressions, and understanding that, I can't afford to harbor resentments. Like, they're the things that will take me out the door quickly. And, left to my own devices, I'm a grumpy, resentful, self-centered, irascible, type of person. I have to work very hard to connect with things like gratitude and patience and presence of mind. These don't come easy to me, but I've gotten better at it, as long as I'm, on top of that program. And so, what does it look like for me? It's a practice just like anything else. And when I'm spiritually fit, then I'm able to show up, not just for myself in my own life, but for the people that depend on me, and for, the audience that I'm trying to serve through the books and the podcast.
Going back to sort of like the addiction thing, I have an addictive personality myself, and I struggled a lot with food, looking at food a certain way, binge eating. I was anorexic and bulimic, that actually ended up spiraling out of control. And I didn't even realize that it was spiraling out of control. I was kind of naive to it. And people would tell me, on one hand, you look great. The next hand, you're going, it's out of control. You're getting worse. And then I just thought, so what? I'm going to do whatever I want to do. Keep doing it. It became like this ever evolving process. And that ended, I was in hospital for 9 days, but you'd think that after that 9-day hospital visit, I would actually have changed my mindset, but it didn't. Like, it was a wake up call, not for sure, because I had a nurse ask me, she's like, why are you here? You're 23 years old. No, sorry, you're 21 years old, and you're in hospital. You shouldn't be in hospital. You should be out enjoying life. And I didn't have an answer for it. I just said, I love my running. I love my restrictive eating, and nothing's going to change. But I love how you mentioned you're still recovering, because it doesn't ever go away. You just learn how to manage it better. And I'm always trying to help as many people that are still struggling with addiction of some kind in their life to get over it, to manage it better, I guess. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
And so how did you get to the other side of it then for yourself?
Well, it took a long time, and I'm still I still have to catch myself. Like, there are days where I notice that I'm slipping a little bit. And on those days, I have to go back to, and I remember being in the hospital bed. I remember the people that came to me and asked me, we, why are you doing this to yourself? Like having a good support group around you as well, like who you associate with is 100% accurate. Like you will become those people if you, yeah. So for me, I'm still managing it. I'm still learning the best ways to manage it. Like for me, I want to still be able to exercise. I want to be able to live a healthy lifestyle. I want to be able to do the things that I love to do. But yeah, it's a process, man. Like it's hard because when one addiction stops, then there's like a lot of um yeah, there's a lot of there's a big chance that a new one will actually come up. So
Well, it's whack-a-mole, right?
yeah.
So it's not like the alcohol or the eating that's the problem, or the lack of eating that's the problem. Those are the solutions to the underlying problem, the bigger problem, which is the emotional dis-ease that you're experiencing, right? So for you, food restriction was a way of trying to gain control over that and manage your emotional disposition. For me, it was alcohol and other things, but the recovery process is really about getting to and addressing that underlying emotional disposition so that the impulse to alter your state in an unhealthy way begins to dissipate. And food is particularly difficult because, unlike drugs or alcohol, abstinence is not only not the solution, that's actually the problem in your case, right? You've got to figure out how to eat and do it in a balanced way. And on top of that, you're trying to manage it with a brain that caused the problem to begin with, which creates the body dysmorphia. When you look in the mirror, you think you don't see yourself in the way that objectively other people see you. So food is tough. It's a hard one. I've got plenty of friends who've had a version of that experience.
There's a whole underlining story that I didn't share that kind of led up to me struggling with food and under eating and all that sort of stuff. But it kind of leads me to my next question for you, Rich, because you are plant-based, you are an advocate about all that, which is pretty incredible. And I've had conversations with people that are plant-based, and I'm always enjoying why people decide to go plant-based in the first place. And for you, I'm curious, how has that helped you with your managing? Has it actually helped you manage your addictions at all? Like with the kind of foods that you do eat? Interesting question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think of diet as being, I don't over-index for diet as it relates to addiction per se. I do think there is, some people think like, oh, Rich was an alcoholic and then he went vegan and became an athlete and it cured him of alcoholism. Like that is not the case at all. Like I'd been sober for many, many, many years before I changed my diet and got into endurance sports. So I don't want people to be confused into believing that diet is a solution protocol to an addiction problem, at least with respect to alcoholism. But I will say this, which is when, I had been eating a terrible fast food diet for many years. I was 50 pounds overweight. I was never like morbidly obese, but I was like a hefty kind of fat guy, working at a law firm and feeling like shit all the time until I had this, kind of health / emotional crisis. And I discovered plant-based eating after I'd tried a whole bunch of other diets. It wasn't like the first thing that I tried. It wasn't like I wasn't looking for it. I was actually trying to avoid it because it sounded so restrictive. But when I started eating this way, I felt amazing, and I couldn't argue with that. Like I just felt better eating only plants than any of the other things that I tried. And where the addiction piece kind of comes in is it was easy for me to make that leap and to do it kind of pretty quickly and dramatically because I applied some of the same sort of mental principles that I apply to recovery, in that eating a plant-based diet is relatively binary in the way that abstaining from drugs and alcohol is binary. Like you're either drinking or doing drugs or you're not. Like you can't like do a little bit of drugs or drink once in a while and claim to be sober. For me, it's about 100% abstinence. And a plant-based diet, I can just say, well, I don't eat animal products, like period, just like I don't drink or do drugs. So I can step over that line, and that's a very simple rule that I adhere to. Now, within that, you can still eat a horribly unhealthy diet that doesn't involve animal products. But that was at least an initial baseline that helped me like wrap my head around it. And then over the years, I've perfected it and continue to iterate on it. And, I've been plant-based for 14 years and it's still agreeing with me and I feel great. And I'm 54 and I can still go out and work out really hard and challenge myself physically. And, I've been doing a lot of gym work lately. I put on like muscle mass. That's a big thing. People say, oh, you're vegan, you're not going to be able to put on any muscle, but I've had no problems with that whatsoever. And what I love about this lifestyle is that it continues to reveal itself to me, because I initially adopted it for very personal health reasons. Like I didn't want to feel lousy. I didn't really have much care or concern for the welfare of the animals or the planet. I was just thinking about myself. But now the environmental implications of the foods that we eat and the suffering that's entailed with the choices that we make 3 times a day has become very important to me. And when you're eating a plant-based diet, what's great about it is not only is it better for you in a health context, it's also better for the planet. And it's certainly better for the animals, right? Who don't have to participate in being slaughtered for them to end up on your plate. So that's kind of how I think about it now.
Do you get much backlash from people? And what do you do with the negative side of things when people sort of have something against you being plant-based?
Over the years, I've gotten a little bit of that, but I don't get a lot of that. And now there's so many more plant-based athletes than there were when I started this. So when I began, it was more like a curiosity. And then I started to kill it in these endurance races, and that attracted a bunch of attention. And certainly there's always going to be detractors or people that are telling me I would have done much better if I adopted some other diet. And I really kind of opt out of that conversation altogether. And I think one of the reasons that I'm not on the receiving end of a lot of criticism is I don't overly proselytize this diet. I don't get on a microphone and tell everybody that they should go vegan or, shellac people because they're not. Like what I learned in sobriety and what keeps me sober is staying out of other people's business. It's not incumbent upon me to take anybody else's inventory or to hold judgment on other people's decisions. So I'm not the person who's out there, shouting into a megaphone about this, that, and the other and go vegan. What I try to do is be a lighthouse. Like I try to live my life in accordance with my values and my principles. And I try to excel mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, and in turn, attract people who would be interested in how I'm doing all these things to me, as opposed to chasing people down and trying to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. Like I'm not interested in changing your mind. Like I know what I'm doing is right for me. If you want to hear about it, I'm happy to tell you about it. But then it's up to you to make a decision for yourself as to how you want to live. And that's not to say that we don't need activists and we don't need people who are shouting into megaphones. I think we need all of those voices. It's just not my particular blueprint to be that type of person.
And that's one of the things that I love and respect about you, Rich, is that you don't try and do that. Even like when you listen to the show, you're very conscious about what you say to the guest. You're very conscious how you respond to the guest and their beliefs, and you don't go and put on your own on them at all. Like you just allow them to share. I think that's what I try and do as well. Like I think people see me and my beliefs and they're like, well, you're that way. So that means I'm not going to listen to you because you're going to be like that on the show. It's not like that at all. Like the story box, or even your show, Rich, I believe is ultimately a place where people can just share stories, have great, deep and meaningful conversations. And if people want to share their beliefs, so be it. Like we all have the power to believe what we want to believe. We all, I guess most of us that are listening are adults. So I don't think it's fair or it's right to judge or to belittle someone for what they do. And basically it goes against, like, if you're attacking them for what they do, it's really attacking their purpose ultimately as a human being. And I don't agree with that. I don't condone it. And
it's also not effective. If you're trying to get somebody to see your point of view, attacking them is really not the strategy that's going to pay dividends. Anyway.
It's not going to work. No. So I'm always like mindful when I do have conversations. Like the reason why I ask people at the beginning, is anything off limits? It's to show that kind of respect, just in case. Okay, if something is off limits, I won't even go there. Like maintaining that person's dignity and that person's truth, whether or not, like, I might disagree with them. I've never actually disagreed with anyone. I'm like, okay, fantastic. Let's move on to the next thing. Which kind of leads me to my next question for you, Rich. You are an ultra runner, and some people, even myself, I am a runner, and I'm always curious, like, why in the world do an ultra, and what goes through your mind when you start? Before, then you start, during, and then after.
Yeah, I mean, I think as to the why, what interests me about the ultra endurance world is that it's this incredible template to explore personal possibility. Like ultras are like proving grounds for human potential. And I don't mean that just physically, like, can you run this distance? I think anybody who does an ultra undergoes kind of this hero's journey, where they're forced to meet themselves in the most vulnerable place possible and to test themselves in situations that you're just not going to find in the normal world. And when you come out of that kind of experience, you are not just more physically fit, you are more mentally, emotionally, and spiritually fit. I just think that they're great vehicles for exploring the interior self. And I mean that in the most meaningful way. And that's what I find attractive. And that's why I think you find, people that find themselves in the ultra world, they're seekers. They're fundamentally seekers. There's a lot of recovering addicts and alcoholics in the endurance community and the ultra endurance community. And I think I understand why that is. In terms of how you approach a race and endure a race and complete it, it's kind of like you bite off this thing that's really scary and you're not sure that you can do it. And then, at least in my case, like, I set about a plan to prepare as best I can for something like that, so that when I toe the starting line, I already know that I can do it. Like, it's already a foregone conclusion. It's just going through the motions to complete it, which is the celebration really of the journey and the preparation it took to get there. When you see Laird Hamilton drop in on some insanely huge wave, he's able to do that only because he worked his way up so gradually that wave doesn't feel that intimidating or that huge for him, because he's been doing it so often, so many times, so that he's fully equipped to be able to handle something like that. And I think ultras are, analogous to that in some regard.
Do you feel like you've unlocked your best self yet, or is there still something more to come for you?
I hope not. I hope. Yeah. I mean, no, I think we're all on this journey to try to, unleash the best version of ourselves. And that's a journey that, we will ply until we find ourselves in the grave. I'm certainly not a perfect person. I'm always working on my character defects and things that I could do better, things that I can master that I have no mastery over. I'm not sure that I have anything I feel I need to prove to myself in the ultra endurance world. Like I've kind of pivoted away from that. I mean, I love it, and I'll probably, race, as long as I can race, but I'm not putting all, like, there was a point in my life where that was everything to me. And I was putting, 25 hours a week into training for those things. Like, that's not the life that I'm living now. Like, I have other things that interest me. And now it's all about how can I be of maximum service in the most meaningful way to the largest number of people. So whether that's a podcast or a book or, giving a talk or whatever it is, like, that's kind of where my head's at. And I have plenty of work to do to, continue to develop mastery over that.
Do you have any regrets?
They say in AA, like, we will not regret the past, or wish to shut the door on it. And, I've done a lot of regrettable things in my life, and I've worked very hard to overcome that regret. So now I look back on them with fondness and gratitude, but I've certainly made mistakes that I wish that I hadn't made. And, like I said, like I'm always very careful to ensure that people know, like, I don't speak from any position of authority. Like, I host this podcast because I'm continuing to grow and learn, and I want to sit across from people who can teach me. I'm not there to, like, profess my wisdom to the audience and tell them, like, here's what you need to do, and this is how you do this. Like, that's something that a teacher feels comfortable doing, but I don't really see myself as a teacher. Like, I'm a seeker, and I put myself in the position of the audience. So yeah, I've done regrettable things. There are things that I wish I could tell you I don't regret any of my mistakes. Of course I do. I have regrets. But we can't change the past. All we can do is change, our future. And we do that by trying to be as present as we can in the moment in which we find ourselves.
Very true. What would you say is your greatest achievement and why? I think my greatest achievement is just achieving long-term sobriety. Without sobriety, I wouldn't be able to do any of these things. I'm sure I would not be alive now. It's been the hardest thing that I've ever done. But it's been, the engine that allows me to do everything else. And without it, like, there's nothing. So that's why it's still my number one priority, and why I feel so passionate, about always talking about it. You've had a lot of conversations with many different amazing people. Who has given you a renewed perspective on life, whether it's been on the podcast or whether it's been outside of the podcast?
I'm trying to think of a dramatic example. I mean, everybody that I talk to offers me something to think about. And that all goes into the soup. It's not like, oh, well, Andrew Huberman said this, so now I'm working on this. Like, it all just kind of is percolating there. And it's hard for me to separate out, like, oh, this person changed my perspective on this, or this person changed my perspective on that. I guess top of mind right now would be Stephen Pressfield, because his books were so instrumental in the earlier part of my career and trying to wrap my head around, like, what I wanted to do next. And having him on the podcast recently was, like, such a beautiful full circle moment and a gift. So he has been, like, and I said this on the show, like, more than any other person that I had never met before, probably had the most profound effect on my life in terms of how I think about and practice creative expression.
If you could ask a question to anyone alive or dead, who would it be, why, and what question would you ask them?
That's impossible to answer that. Any question to any person ever?
Yes. Anyone that you've dreamed of, thought of, anyone.
That's so hard.
I
You're gonna
love
have to
asking
edit
this
out
question
some
to podcasters.
dead time. Um, man, how do I answer that?
Or what is a question specifically that you have always wanted to know the answer to, and someone who you feel like you haven't actually spoken to yet could give you that answer?
Hmm.
Because you ask a lot of great questions.
It's funny because I don't think of it in terms of asking questions, like I'm having conversations, but I don't make a list of questions. Like, here's the question that I want answered. Like, I'm curious about the person, but it's never like question focused. Um, if you want to just get like super macro, it's like, let's sit down with the Buddha and, get him to answer, like, what is it all about, man? Like, what is the meaning, dude?
Yeah.
Tell me. But all these people have written about these things. I'm not sure that answering that question could be better than anything that's already been written in ancient texts.
So you mentioned there that going into a conversation, you don't have like a list of questions, you're just very curious. Have you ever been in the moment and just gone, oh crap, I've lost it? And how did you get it back?
Yeah, a couple times. I mean, I found that when that happens, and it happens every once in a while, it's because I'm caught up in my ego and I'm not present and I'm not paying attention. I'm worried about what the guest thinks of me. I'm worried about what the audience is going to think if I don't come up with something clever to ask. I'm caught up in my, in all the noise of my head that has to do with ego and approval and the like. And so my preparation for a show is to I prepare as much as possible, and then I try to remove all of that and then to show up and be present for whatever wants to happen. Like, if you're at a dinner party and you're sitting across from somebody, you're having a conversation with your friends, you never think like, oh my God, I can't think of anything to say. Like, that never happens, right? That only happens when you've like constructed this false, fake, like pressure cooker environment where you feel like you have to put on a performance, right? And if you can alleviate yourself of that pressure and just be authentic to who you are, a lot of that goes away. So I always ask to just be a channel for the best version of what this can possibly be, and I try to get out of the way. It's the ego that causes all of those problems.
Which is good advice for me. Like,
Mm.
I love what Larry King said, the late great Larry King. He's like, I never learned anything when I was talking.
Yeah.
And it's like, people have asked me, so Jay, when you're going into a big interview, say like a Tony Robbins or a Matthew McConaughey, how much did you actually prepare? And, it's interesting, like for my conversation with Matthew, I read his book twice over. I wrote notes. I'm like, this is the kind of questions I'm going to ask him. And then literally when we started talking, stripped it all away. And we just like had this organic conversation, which ended up being one of the best ones that I've ever had. And, I think the pressure cooker is the moment you press record and you go, oh crap, now we've got to go on now. I've got to ask this person a question. So that authenticity is really valuable. So
yeah, if you're holding on too tightly, then you're robbing yourself of the possible miracle that can ensue. Like, if you had this list of questions for Matthew and you're like, I got to ask him these questions, and he's going off on some beautiful monologue, but you're so caught up in your head about your questions, you miss the whole thing. And then you end up cratering it because you can't just let it go and be present for what's happening, right? So one adage that I find to be very helpful is, to your point of like, do you ever have a brain freeze and you don't know what to ask next? If you're actually listening to the person, you'll always know what the next thing to say is, right? It's only when you take yourself out of the moment and you start spinning in your mind that you end up with some kind of brain fog and confusion, right?
Yeah. I'm always mindful of my guest time as well. Like it's for me, I have so many questions that I do want to ask them. And then even in the moment, they come up with so many great responses to just one question. And I'm like, oh, there's so many great avenues I can go down here. So my mind is trying to pick which avenue to actually go down whilst also being mindful of the time. Because honestly, like if I wanted to, and if I had the guest permission, I'd go for hours. Because one thing that I have a problem with is, Rich, I can talk like there is no tomorrow. Sometimes it might not make sense at all, but I'll still say it. And why not, right?
Well, then you have the right job. You have the right job for yourself, man.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Right. Yeah. So it's, yeah.
So I do want to be mindful of your time because you're very busy. 3 more quick final questions for you, if you don't mind. Your new book, Voicing Change. It's a powerful reminder of the conversations that we do need to be having. And I'm curious for you, what have you noticed is the most powerful conversation that we should be having more of?
I think it depends on who you're talking to, because that can take many forms. But overall, the kind of overarching, mantra that I like to say is that meaningful conversation matters. Whether it's about something small or large, it all matters. And I think that, in this moment in which we're seeing a breakdown in productive conversation and we're seeing unprecedented, division, whether those lines are drawn politically or over religion or what have you, I despair over this increasing inability of human beings to find a way to communicate in a healthy manner. And if we can't course correct that, I don't see how we move forward as a society. And what I try to do with the podcast, in the sense that I have, from what you do, is that the way forward is to have these kinds of conversations, to be able to meet people where they're at and to engage in the necessary nuance with a level of maturity and consciousness that allows other people to see that even if 2 people don't see eye to eye on a certain issue, that they can still find a way to break bread and to come away from that experience fulfilled in some way or another. And I think that is something that's bred into us as human beings, dating back to as far as humanity has ever existed. Like, we need to return to the campfire, where the villagers sat across from each other and swapped stories. And we don't have that anymore. We have Twitter, where we bicker and we fight and we don't listen. And that is not a situation that's going to end well. So that's why podcasting, I feel so passionate about podcasting, and why I think it's so powerful, and why I think it's become so popular, because there is something inside of us that craves that needs that. And when we find it, we're like, this is nourishment. This is the nourishment that I'm not getting in my social media feeds or in, the interactions that I'm having throughout my day with the person behind the cash register, or, the customer service person on the other end of the phone. And in order to avail ourselves of this opportunity, we got to slow down, right? We got to take the time and just allow these conversations to wash over us. And I think it's important. I really, really do.
Do you believe that change is on the cards within your lifetime, like this kind of change you're talking about, or more like another 100 years down the line?
I think we're in there are positive and negative forces out there warring for our attention. Unfortunately, the negative forces are much more addictive and they're more easily monetized. So they are winning this war at the moment. But I have faith in humanity, and I think, to my earlier point, the fact that long form podcasting is such a popular medium right now is something that gives me hope. I've also been paying a lot of attention to Clubhouse, and I think what's going on in Clubhouse is similar in that regard, like groups of people getting together to talk, in the middle of the day in real time without any kind of post-production or editing. Like, what a cool thing. And I think that is humanity trying to save itself, like figuring out these ways to keep us connected in the midst of a pandemic where we can't way that we would like to, or that we need to be healthy human beings. So time will tell. If humanity still exists in 100 years, I'd probably call that a win. We got big existential threats against us right now, very big problems that we need to solve. But I believe in people. And if I've learned anything over my 54 years and my almost 9 years of podcasting, is that there are a lot of amazing individuals out there carrying a powerful vibration. The prophets do walk among us, and I believe in our collective power to solve our problems, save ourselves, and create the sustainable world that we not only need, but that I think that we deserve.
That's powerful. I hope that it does happen soon. That's just my personal point of view, because I do believe we have gone off track a lot in many ways. That's why we have a lot of mental health issues, and more so today, there's so many kids that are struggling with mental health. And looking back to when I was a kid, and that wasn't that long ago, I didn't struggle with it. So 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds are dealing with traumas, with depression, anxiety, and all kinds of horrendous things. And you just look at the short space of time that has taken place in, and now they're dealing with social media, because I didn't have social media growing up. And it's like, I'm only 24. So put that into perspective. I think you're right. I think we do need to keep having these kinds of conversations, to go deep, to hope that people will listen to them and actually take action. And Rich, I just appreciate you for having these kinds of conversations and doing the work that you're doing. So where can people buy your new book, by the way?
Thank you, Jay. So Voicing Change is my latest book. It's basically a coffee table compendium of the podcast. It's something you could leave out and open up to any page. It's excerpts from 50 of my favorite guests over the years, with some essays contributed by some of those guests, my thoughts, of course, and then excerpts from those conversations. And we self-published this book, so it's only available on my website. It's not on Amazon or anywhere else. So you can just find it at richroll.com/VC. And we ship globally. Shipping, unfortunately, is expensive to places like Australia. And when you're not on Amazon and everyone's used to free shipping, there's a lot of grousing about that. We don't make any money off shipping. There's nothing I can do about it. We're trying to find some more affordable shipping options. But for the meantime, shipping is a thing.
I think this book is worth the price, though. So I've actually got mine on checkout, believe it or not. I did this before jumping on.
Yeah.
So, and shipping was like $37, express shipping to Australia, for those people who are wondering how much, which is not much, to be honest with you. It's not much at all. So my final question.
It's more than I would like it to be.
Yeah, I can imagine. But you're such a generous guy, man. So I know for a fact that you would like it to be a lot lower than what it is. Um, yeah, but Rich, my final question for you. This is my all-time favorite question I ask all my guests at the very end. So I want you to imagine with me for a moment. It's a hypothetical one, but imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of an argument. But being able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday, what do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Um, that's a great question. I think that I would want the film to show and say uh, that I lived my life authentically, and that I gave in the service of others, and that I cared for the people and took care of the people that I love.
It's a beautiful way to end that conversation. Rich rolling on in his life and on the show today. So thank you so much for coming on the Storybox podcast and sharing your story.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me.